Hello, everyone. This is Tracy Brooker with the Creative Outcomes podcast. And my podcast is all about homeschooling, unschooling, self-directed learning, and alternative education, and how you can find success in all of those, no matter what you choose. And today with me, I have a very special guest, Judith Hurst. And I am going to honestly speak about myself. I told Judith that I couldn't sleep last night because I was so excited and I had all these questions running through my mind because most of you know, if you've been to my website, I am a very spiritual person. I've written a book that kind of combines this idea of consciousness and learning. And I meet this woman and I felt like I told my friend, I felt like I was speaking to myself. Where did she come from? We just connected so well. And so there's a little bit of nervous energy in myself, but know that I couldn't be more thrilled for her to share her experiences with you. So without further ado, Judith, can you please, and let me share real quick, we are going to talk about Judith's near-death experience and how it has changed her perspective in learning, education, consciousness. So, Judith, if you could tell everyone about yourself, your background in this physical world, and then pretty much what has happened to you, and then we had spoke prior. I would love for people to just melt into your experience of your near-death experience. Take it away, Judith.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Let me just start by saying on the Zoom, it says Judith Hurst. My actual name for work and communication is Hurst, Hurst. So Google has it as Hurst. For anyone wanting to contact me, it's Hurst, Hurst.
Thank you for clearing that up. Yes, absolutely.
That was kind of important. Okay, good. So where do I begin? Let's see. Okay, so my journey as an educator. It's so beautiful to view things from a higher perspective, because from that point we can see how everything falls into place. And so when I threw down some notes initially when I first talked to you, I did the chronology thing and thought, okay, so how did it start? And I realized it wasn't when I started as a teacher. It actually started when I was a child. When I was little, we had the New York City public school strike, which was huge. It was in the news and it was a big deal. So I was, when was that? 1968. So I was six years old, big strike. And my mom, being quite the radical, wonderful, beautiful, progressive angel that she is, said, right, well, I'll teach everyone in our home. So as a child, I had the experience of sort of home education on the fly, facilitated by this incredible woman, my mother, who was incredibly creative and open-minded and loving and everything a beautiful human being should be. So I wasn't thinking, oh, we're homeschooling now. It just was an event that happened in my childhood. But my mother had always talked about Jane Elliott, the blue eye, brown eye experiment. And so that passion for education and equality, the seeds were sown when I was very young, and it just somehow took root.
Now, can you, because I'm sure there's a lot of people on it, they're not familiar with that experiment. Can you just do a quick little overview of what that was?
Sure. So Jane Elliott was a public school teacher in New York, not New York, another state, but a public school teacher. And she decided to do an experiment to teach the children to experience the truth of racism and how that worked. And so she had the children sort of role play the brown-eyed students and the blue-eyed students. And you can Google it, and there's plenty of videos, and it's just life-changing. And the children were all instructed, if the brown-eyed students, they were all stupid and don't socialize with them, and their pencils were all broken, and it was set up especially to show the bias that is inherent in a society. So the children were in this experiment thinking, this isn't fair, and they could actually feel it and experience it themselves. And it was an amazing experiment, and a sociological experiment that really changed the way we see the racial structure and education and all sorts of things. So I highly encourage everyone, if they haven't seen it, the Jane Elliott Blue Eye, Brown Eye experiment. You can YouTube it. It's wonderful. And so that was such a profound experience for me as a child. But then, of course, I forgot about it and went off and grew up and went off and did my thing and didn't start my life as a teacher. I was always fascinated with learning and Piaget. I was the kind of young person who'd be reading Piaget, light reading. So I always found child development, psychology, all of that fascinating. When I went to college, I studied philosophy and also education. And there's something deeper in there, though, that really called me. So when I started, eventually I started working as a teacher and had such a rude awakening, because all my beautiful ideas of joyful, natural learning were just trashed when I was in systems that just weren't built to be loving, because they just didn't have the time and the resources to really listen to a child or offer some children in a room one approach and other children a different approach. It had to be the bell rings. We all do these worksheets. The bell rings. It had to be. So I found my years in the public school at first fantastic. I loved it because I was being who I am, a teacher. And I was, those Hilary Swank movies, To Say With Love, and all those inspirational teacher movies. That was me. I loved teaching. I was very creative. I loved my students. I worked crazy hours without even batting an eyelid. I just loved it. So I did that for a while. And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm actually supporting a system that's actually really punitive and abusive. I had students, public school students, that were not from very lovely homes and experienced atrocities, and they were expected just to go back to school the next day after one boy witnessed his father had killed himself, and he still had to turn in his homework. And I thought, what are we doing? Yeah. And just other things that made me, I can't be a part of this system. And it came to the point where I just could no longer participate in a system that I found to be, for me, that abusive. And so I knew I had to leave, and it broke my heart. It's who I am. I am on this earth to teach. My soul knows this. So for me to find myself in a situation where I thought, I can't do what I'm supposed to do, I fell into a horrible depression. My life was over. So dramatic. I mean, it was really, really painful to have that realization, because what else could I do? I couldn't do anything. And so how did I find Aero? I'm not sure. I must have Googled, what do I do if I love teaching? I love teach, one of those things.
Right.
And I came across, I don't know, well, I was going to say I don't know how, but of course I know how, because everything happens exactly how it happens. So I came across Jerry Mintz, Mintz. I'm just spelling him out. I know you know him, but
Yes.
he's...
Who will be on the podcast, by the way. So.
By the way, anyone listening, he is a hero, a true education hero.
Yes.
And I love him.
Yes.
So he was super instrumental in helping me when I first started my educational alternative. And he is just an amazing soul and a great table tennis player.
Side note.
Yeah, he's great. So when I discovered Jerry Mintz and Aero, that was it. I went, oh, so education can be fun and joyful and loving and supportive, and it can honor the student, and it can allow for the true child to develop naturally according to who they are. Oh my goodness, yes! And every atom of my being just did a yay dance.
It exists.
Eyes opened. It was beautiful. So that was it. I just found this amazing energy in me that comes from that place of just joy and egoless expansiveness, and just plunged myself into starting my own non-school. And it was called Yellowwood Learning Community. Yellowwood comes from the Robert Frost poem, Two Roads Diverge in the Yellow Wood. And the poem is all about choices and options and not knowing which path to take. And that not knowing being okay. People misinterpret the poem very often as take the road not taken, do the unusual thing. That's not how I interpret the poem. It's much more about life isn't going to give you a roadmap. You have to feel your way, and you have to develop your intuition to know and to trust. So for me, and I hadn't even connected with my own intuition at that point, but somehow I knew that quote really resonated. So that's why the school was called Yellowwood. And I opened it, and it was everything that I think learning should be. The students were heard. The students had a big say in what they studied and how the community was run. It was just a truly powerful time in my life where I felt that this is who I am. I'm doing what I'm on this earth to do. Still, I hadn't quite noticed my ego, because the ego is really sneaky. And it can also look like, oh, I'm doing this really good thing for these students, and I'm doing something really worthwhile. That's just as egotistical as do it like this because I know best. Yeah. So I hadn't seen that. I thought, aren't I wonderful doing this thing? And alternative education is wonderful, which it is. But I hadn't realized that I had ignored myself at the cost of starting this school. And I was working so many hours and just putting myself last. And one day at work, I thought, oh, I'm feeling a little bit funny, actually. And then suddenly I couldn't think well. And that for me was a big no-no, because I had defined myself my whole life by my intellect. I was smart. And my ego was all wrapped up in that story of I'm so smart that it was no irony that that was the first thing to go. And I became completely muddled and confused, and I couldn't understand the clock, the time, or numbers. Everything was going mushy. And I said to one of the teachers there, one of the helpers, can you just cover things for a minute? I just don't feel well. And I think it was by the end of the day or the next day, I was in hospital, and I had my let's see. So I went to the hospital. So that was the fourth. I ended up having my fourth brain surgery.
Wow.
So I had already had 3 brain surgeries before that I had just disregarded. I just went back to work and I was sort of annoyed that I had
I can conquer this. Yes.
Another brain tumor? I'll be back to work in 2 weeks, which I was. I have photographs of myself with all my students, and they gave me this sort of comedy afro wig. So to cover, because I had no hair, obviously I had it shaved for the surgeries. So it was all a big joke to me at that point. And but this fourth one was really different. And the fourth one is when I had the near-death experience and when everything changed for me.
So, and this is, here you are. And I really want to hear. So, and I'm going to go there. You're in the hospital, right? So you go to the emergency room, they walk in and they say this. So take us like step by step now from what kind of brought you to this experience.
Okay. So at first, it was my very sweet friend who noticed that I wasn't walking properly. And she insisted I go to the emergency room. And I was quite dismissive and said, "Don't be ridiculous, I'm fine." And she said, "No, you're not." And so I did go to the hospital and they did the scans. And I can remember being embarrassed, thinking, "Oh gosh, all this fuss and scans and I'm fine, how embarrassing." And then they came back and they said, "No, we found another mass on your brain." And that's when I kind of went, "Whoops." And so I had another surgery, but this tumor now, the fourth one, was in a very different place. It was as deep in as, people put 2 pencils in your ears and that way.
Okay, got it.
The center. So very inaccessible, not an easy surgery. So after having already had 3 previous surgeries, this one was not accessible. So it was pretty much no surgery for you, no options, oops. But they found, you see, I'm getting the chronology mixed up, a surgeon who did do this 4th surgery. There we go. It's the 5th one. I wouldn't do. The 4th one, Dr. Rodriguez, amazing doctor. He did do that surgery. And during that surgery is when I had the near-death experience.
So you're going into surgery, right? The nurse pre-op, they come, they give you your medicine to help you a little sleepy, right? Do you remember getting rolled into surgery or no? Were you already asleep by then?
Yeah, I did remember because the chap who rolled me in was trying to chit-chat and take my mind off things as if I needed that. I was completely fine and thought the whole thing was a bit of a laugh, really. And he got chatting to me and he said something about loving the show EastEnders. Now, EastEnders is a very popular TV show in England, all about people who live in the East End. And I can remember thinking, I don't want my last conversation to be about this awful TV show.
That's funny.
So off I got wheeled into the operating room. And so that was that. And then when I woke up from the surgery, so I had the experience during the surgery. And then when I woke up, I can remember going over it and reliving what I had experienced and trying to make sense of it.
So share the experience from the beginning to the end.
Well, it's extremely underwhelming. This is the problem with anyone who has experienced true self-actualization. It's a huge non-event. So there are people like Anita Morjani and Eben Alexander, who can recount their near-death experiences because they go off and they meet ancestors and they meet all sorts of people in some other realm. Mine is very non-eventful insofar as I literally just melted into pure consciousness. I had no. Jill Bolte Taylor's TED Talk is probably the closest I can get to describing it. There's no left or right hemisphere. I lost all sense of logic, or there was no thing. It's so hard to describe an experience that has no words. And anyone who says, let me explain my true experience of awakening, the true awakening, then they're not quite there because it's inexplicable. We can use words to get as close to it as we can, such as bliss and perfection and release and nothing. It is a magical nothingness that feels more beautiful, more peaceful, more joyful, more loving. And if I say love, even that, the
Isn't
mind
enough.
comes in and says, oh, I know love. That's romance and that's experience. Right. But love is a very neutral energy that just allows and accepts and embraces everything.
Beautiful.
With acceptance, I guess. So it's only the mind that likes to say, oh, love feels like something. And I guess it does, because it feels like everything you've ever wanted and ever been and every good thing that one could possibly feel.
That's
times
beautiful.
a gazillion. Times infinity, but every part of your being is it, and I was everywhere. I am everywhere.
Yeah, you are a part of it.
Everything, yes. I became everything across all time and space.
Wow.
As pure joy. So really hard to put into words.
I think you did a wonderful job. Okay, so you come out of it, and here you are. You have this school. And even understanding alternative education, self-directed learning, share with our audience this perception that has possibly changed because of your experience.
In terms of the education?
And learning?
Well, I had already had that understanding from Jerry Mintz's experience and the Aero conference. So I'd already understood that. The near-death experience just helped me realize, I had the understanding that everything is already one and everything is love, and that we are not these bodies. So when I had to come back into this physical body, there was a huge disparity between what I just experienced as my true self, which is what we all are. Our true self is this magnificent, powerful energy that is uncontainable, but we contain it in a thing called the body. And we walk around with a story. I'm the Judith story in the Judith story body. And it's quite convenient for getting around. And it's a good vehicle for doing all sorts of things, but it's not who we are. So since the surgery, when I woke up from the surgery, I had to deal with the boring stuff first. I had to learn how to walk and talk and see and that sort of thing first. I couldn't do any of that. But I luckily, the hospital had this remarkable rehabilitation center in it, and I learnt to walk again and talk again. And the first thing I asked for, I said, give me paper and pen. I just wanted to know that I could write. And of course, it's hilarious because I couldn't. And God bless my daughter, she kept the first few things that I'd written in my attempts to, here I am. And it's
Right.
crazy, the writing. It looks like those notes that serial killers leave. It's all sort of chicken scratch. So had to learn to read and write and walk and all that sort of thing again. I couldn't really see, and so I couldn't read books. That was a bit sad. But I was determined that I would
Continue
go back
on.
to doing what I was doing one day, although I had no ability to really understand that was possible for me, because there I was, completely incapacitated, about as far from being a teacher as you can imagine. So I had to let go, and that was the biggest lesson, letting go of everything.
Wow.
Letting go of my story, letting go of my, letting go of everything. My body, I have no fear of death anymore, none. Not that I was especially fearful of death before, but I have zero fear. And it's not like I welcome it like, oh, I can't wait, because I certainly, I don't want to hurry that along. But I know with every atom of my being that there is no fear in death, none.
I love that. And I think what I love too is having this experience, and I guess I should ask you this question, because yes, you understood alternative education and self-directed learning, but you said this to me when I first met you, is it really is the big S.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. You see, I knew I would forget everything. You're right.
No, the big S. And, one of my favorite things to do is, when you're working with students, but working with, you're really not doing anything. It's the taking a step back and observing the self within them. So, which I have to say, the audience is probably like, what do you mean by the self, the big S? So you might want to elaborate on that one a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Yes. And that's one of the things I loved, to put the puzzle pieces together, because I had always studied self-directed learning, and Jerry Mintz, of course, introduced me self-directed. And then when I had my own near-death experience and realized, wait a minute, the self, wait, and the penny dropped, not the self, little Judith, the self, the big soul self that is everything that I had experienced in that NDE. And that soul is the self in the self-directed learning. Mm-hmm. So it's not enough to facilitate young children, here's play in the sand pit and do what you want with your small self, but to facilitate their understanding of their true self, mm-hmm. which is so powerful and so capable of anything beyond what we can imagine, because we've squished ourselves, little s's, big s's, into this little story self. And so we can die, we can get worried, we can doubt, we can do all those things that the little person does. But when we look at life from our capital S self point of view, self-directed learning is about connecting to the soul and saying, what does my soul want to do right now? Oh, my soul really wants to just do some more biology because that makes me so happy. That's the soul-directed learning. There we go.
So, So I have a question, because I'm sure there are people here who, for some reason, they have to continue into the conditional school system, compulsory education. And there they are in this awareness. And there might be students who are listening to this going, how do I get out of this? Or what can I do? what advice would you offer a parent who says, listen, I got to work and they're safer if they're at school? And, what would you offer as far as advice for someone who may not have the opportunity to be in a alternative education, home education, etc.?
Well, excellent question. Well, there's always creative solutions. So my first step would be to say to a family, if homeschooling is something that you really want to do, but you're saying we can't, let's sit down and see if that's really true.
Wow.
And sometimes it's quite a painful process for the family to realize, wow, we actually spend a lot of money on this. We could actually give that up if we let go of the story that we should be driving this car or we should be having these. When we drop that, sometimes we reveal, oh, we actually could do that. Again, not always possible, even at that level. So go a bit further and say, is there a way maybe I could collaborate with really close, dear friends who could support me in starting a small cooperative childcare thing that allows for us still to work. I trust these people with my heart and soul. Maybe there's a creative way that I can do something like that. And then if you keep exhausting the possibilities and it comes down to, no, that's the only option really is the traditional school system. If that's the case, then there's nothing more powerful than the words out of parents' mouths. So one could send one's child to the most punitive military school that has quite aggressive educators there. But if that child comes home every day to a home that is just full of laughter and joy and modeling what tenderness looks like, what inquisitive looks like, what true curiosity and compassion looks like.
Yeah, I agree.
Those seeds will grow and that child will find a way to the literature and the path and all the resources it needs. So if a family really can't do those things, and I suggest that they most often can, they just don't want to yet. And that's another question for parents to really look at, why don't you want to? And I'm not accusing anybody ever. Everybody's path is for them to explore and to learn. But if it's a knee-jerk response, oh, but I can't, I have to work. Wait, you have to work at a job that you really don't like? Why? So I would really ask families to get creative if they really want that for their child.
Beautiful. One question I do want to ask is, and a side note is, you had talked about, and I think this would be another podcast, and how, and the idea of wanting to start a school. But even in your own personal experience, what do you think was the greatest challenge when it came to alternative education, self-directed learning? You talked about your daughter. What challenges, even as a parent, a challenge that you can remember that, oh, how am I going to deal with this one?
My own personal ego.
Yeah.
I think for anyone thinking, oh, let's start a school, let's start an alternative school. I've read all the books and I'm really inspired by all these people. Let's do it. Step one, know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Capital S, know yourself. Because the challenges inherent in creating a community are manifold. It's just so many challenges that will try to stop you from being successful. Society, friends, stories, you name it. So one really needs to be so grounded in oneself and one's philosophy. Because if parents come at you saying, well, I don't know, why are they running around barefoot? We should start a rule that says they have to wear shoes. Before that happens, you have to be very clear. What's your philosophy on that? And those were the sort of things that I didn't anticipate, because I just thought it's going to be great and it's going to be different. It's going to be so good. But the parents, that was difficult to navigate. The different needs, the different wants. Yeah.
Even when I homeschooled, I always like to share that it took a part of me to say, whenever I had pushback, is to kind of take a step back out of my own ego and start asking these questions of, is that true?
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I had not evolved that much at that point.
Yeah.
So I had to learn my lessons the hard way, the brain surgery way, the near-death way. But good for you for learning those lessons before. And I would encourage anyone listening to really do the work before. The Sedona method is a fantastic approach to really dismantling stories about oneself and understanding one's true nature. And there are many other ways. Byron Katie's work called The Work. But to really know thyself deeply.
The big S.
Yeah, there it is then.
Your next book. Speaking of books, I always like to end the podcast of any books, whether it's education, obviously spirituality, that you would love to share with our audience.
Well, there's so many books, I wouldn't even know where to begin. And I wanted to make sure to mention Susie Miller. She's a remarkable educator who has blended education and consciousness now to really understand learners of very different types, because she was a speech pathologist in a public school for many, many years. And she came across a student for the first time who was on the autism spectrum. And nobody knew at that time what to do with this interesting child. And Susie Miller recounts her experiences with this child, and it's quite remarkable. It's truly, so I really, if anyone interested in children on the spectrum and meeting their needs, Susie Miller, and her work on YouTube, I'm sure she has YouTube, I don't know, is incredible. Other than that, more traditionally, let's see, Parker Palmer. I think this has to be one of the great education books.
The Courage to Teach, beautiful.
Remarkable. Let's see, good old rest in peace, Ken Robinson.
I love that. Out of Our Minds. Yeah, we were at the same conference,
Yes.
I think, when he came out of that book. Anything by Ken Robinson is
wonderful.
Yeah, beautiful.
John Taylor Gatto, Dumbing Us Down.
Yep.
A wonderful book. Of course, Jonathan Kozol, another.
Illiterate America.
Grace Llewellyn, fantastic writer. So many wonderful books. It's my favorite, The Tao of Pooh.
Beautiful.
Not an education book necessarily, but it's a small, beautifully written, easy book, very deep about Taoism and life and how to be happy and how to let go. So it's always a wonderful book for everyone to read, whether educator or not. David Bingham's work, like I said, he hasn't written a book, but his work on non-duality is just stunningly simple and beautiful. And non-duality is simple.
Yes.
Anyone who tries to complicate it is just complicating it. Because it's
yes. Yeah, and it's awareness of the duality in your thoughts. And right, are they left, right, yes, no? Right, things have to be. And is the ego in duality, or can you just be present in the now?
Exactly. Because everything is in the now, everything, even the duality arises out of the one.
Yeah.
I personally love consciousness and studying non-duality and all the teachers. It's fascinating, but that's a sort of different path perhaps than beyond. Maybe it's beyond the scope of your podcast. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. To be honest with you, every conversation I've had so far always ends up discussing the essence of a child, discussing about the present moment, the state of the now, not worrying about, what could happen in the future because they're not in a career ready. It's about, well, what's happening right now?
Exactly. And they will self-actualize in self-directed learning. They will discover themselves and they will truly understand who they are and what they love. And then they cannot fail. It's only when they take on the limitations of, I have to do this worksheet, or I'm comparing myself to others in the class, or I'm behind, or I'm advanced. Both are stories. It's only when we start comparing children and expecting them to be something other than who they are in that moment.
Start
running into problems. And the more we empower young children to really embrace who they are in every moment, and the language of the adults around them to be loving and conscious and supportive, and never to diminish, oh, Susie, you don't really like that. Come on. Don't you want to try this instead? I'm happy to offer young learners options because that's how we learn. Vanilla, chocolate, what would you like? But to offer them options with a tacit bias is very dangerous.
Yeah. I cannot thank you enough for coming and sharing on this podcast. Like I said, it's meant so much to me personally. And what would be a great way for people to, they can go to my website, tracybrooker.com. You will see the date of the podcast and Judith's information. So Judith, if you can share right now a great way that people can reach out to you.
I guess for now, just my email, judithmhurst@gmail. That's the easiest way. And I know it says Hirsch on the, but it's actually HURST. So that's Judith M as in Mary, Judith M. Hurst @gmail. If they want to send me a correspondence, that would be great.
Wonderful. Again, I can't thank you enough. I'm in so much gratitude. I will be on cloud 9 for so long because of our connection. And thank you to everyone who has listened. And again, go to my website if you want more information on Judith. And wait, Judith, no, you did not share. And I would like you to share about what you do for your day job.
Well, not quite a day job, but what happened when I had the near-death experience and then started recovering, I discovered this passion for animal communication. And something deep in my soul said, oh, that looks like fun. I want to learn that. And then when I realized that I didn't have to learn it, I had to remember that I could do it, that we all can, I thought, whoa, that's exciting. So I launched myself into studying animal communication, which is really just it's just consciousness in disguise, really. And loved it. And realized that I do this thing that we call animal communication now, which is basically connecting to the thoughts and feelings and emotions of other animals and beings. I do it with people too. I helped somebody whose child had very severe Tourette syndrome, and she was really struggling in school, and the parents were really struggling to understand her needs. And so I connected soul to her and could help the family. So I've realized that I can do this thing, soul and animal communication, which many people find very healing, especially if they have an animal that they love and adore who's not well or is passing or something, and they really find great comfort in knowing their thoughts and feelings and emotions, especially for animals who have passed, for people who miss them. It can be really very comforting to bring through evidence to show them that their animal is absolutely fine and happy and blissed out, as we all will be when we
and the love is still there. Love never ends.
Ever. Energy can never be created or destroyed. I mean, that's pure physics. For people who don't like all this woo stuff, that's physics. Energy can never be created or destroyed. So it stands to reason that Einstein is still right here, Shakespeare's still right here, my mom is still right here. It's just energy can never be destroyed. So I personally find animal communication fascinating and thrilling and healing. So that's what I'm doing now.
So would love it if anyone, like I said, you know how to get a hold of Judith now. And again, I cannot thank you enough. So we will end our podcast. Thank you, everyone who is listening, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Creative Outcomes podcast. And if you'd like to learn more, go to my website at tracybrooker.com.